particular, I'd like to stress that I'm referring to cryptocurrencies in general, because our attack applies to a wide class of cryptocurrencies, not just Bitcoin, although for our examples we'll focus mostly on Bitcoin. And the problem is one that is a very pressing one and an important one, and that's Alice wants to buy a cookie. And she wants to pay for that cookie. And in particular, she wants to buy this on a website. So we're all familiar with this. We probably do it many times a day. And go to Amazon, we go to the product page, pick the cookie we like, add it to our cart. When we're done shopping, maybe we get some milk as well, and then we add that to our cart. Our cart page usually gives us a preliminary total, which doesn't include, say, shipping prices and the like, and taxes. And then when we're done, we go to the checkout page. And in the usual web payment scenario, where you say you're paying with a credit card, the checkout page is sort of the last step. You put your credit card details in, you see the final price, and you're done. However, when you're paying with a cryptocurrency, once you, on the checkout page, you indicate that you'd like to pay with a cryptocurrency, and then you're forwarded to a payment processor, which says, okay, here's the address, send us your payment, and then only once the payment is received do you go to the final receipt page. And a payment processor looks like this. This is BitPay, the largest payment processor, and they throw up something on your screen that says, here's the Bitcoin price, because notice when you're shopping, you may have been shown a fiat price, such as a USD or euros, but on this page, they'll actually do the exchange rate and tell you to send exactly this many Bitcoin to this address, and you have a 15-minute time window, which is your time to make the payment, and after that, it expires. So, okay, Alice wants to buy a cookie. She now has some idea how, after seeing that tutorial, so she goes ahead. It's a very expensive cookie. It costs 8 Bitcoins. But it's really, really good. So in Alice's wallet, she has these 3 coins. She has a 5 coin, a 3 Bitcoin, and a 6 Bitcoin coin. And these are Bitcoin outputs, but think of them as each of these are controlled by a different public key. And on the blockchain, there's no way to know that maybe that these all belong to Alice, but she owns all these because she has 3 public keys, and each one has this amount associated with it. And Alice was really, really good in her math class, and she knew that no problem, she can put these 2 in and get her 8 Bitcoin. Awesome. And notice that she has 2 inputs from a single transaction, 2 different coins, and this leads to linking, because now anyone that sees this transaction on the blockchain can say, okay, these 2 coins are controlled by Alice, or by the same person. They may not know it's Alice. And in particular, they can say any other coins held by those same addresses are also held by the same entity. So we've clustered addresses in this way, and this can be done transitively to build up large clusters. And this is an idea going back to 2011 and the well-known work by Sarah Michael-John is expanded on this and give other heuristics. But for our purposes, let's just think of clustering as a black box. One of the things that it uses is a shared spending heuristic. Okay, so how does clustering work? So you have all these coins that are not clearly associated with each other, and then you run your nifty clustering algorithm, and boom, all the coins get colored. Which tells you that there's some shared spending among them, and you can cluster them and say, okay, these coins are controlled by similar entity, by one entity. So each of these clusters represents one logical entity, even though each of these coins may be from a different address, but now you know that these addresses are controlled by a single entity. Okay, so how do you what's one heuristic that's common to break clustering? You use what's known as mixing. And here we're looking at decentralized mixing, which is coin join. And the basic idea is very simple. You have here 4 people getting together, each of them have clusters of addresses, and they create jointly a single transaction in which they each input a coin and output a new coin to a fresh address. And in particular, these fresh addresses, there's no way for someone looking to correlate the output address to the input address. So now, all of these people coming out have an anonymity set of 4. Because you know that it's one of these inputs corresponds to each output, but you don't know which one. And you can do this in rounds. And you can get a large anonymity set of many coins that it's not clear which coin is actually belongs to you. Okay, and this leads us to our first attack, which is a single transaction linkage attack. So Alice wants to buy a cookie. She's getting there. She has a cluster of coins. So what does she do? She goes ahead and sends one of her coins to the shop, and the shop goes back and sends the cookie. And everyone's happy, except shop can now say, well, I saw this coin, and I know that these coins are all clustered, so this whole cluster belongs to Alice. So shop identified Alice. Okay, that's clear that can happen. But the question that we ask, one of the questions we ask in this paper is, what can a third-party tracker sitting on Alice on the shop's website identify about Alice? Now, clearly, if the tracker sees everything and sees the Bitcoin payment address, it can go ahead and say, well, this is Alice's transaction, and do the clustering itself. So if it has the same information as the merchant, there's nothing interesting here. But the interesting question is, in cases of uncertainty, where the tracker doesn't have the payment address, maybe it has the fiat payment, maybe it has just the payment price, maybe it doesn't even have the full price, maybe there's price uncertainty, so the tracker sits on the cart page. It doesn't know shipping, if there's shipping or no shipping, or what the tax was, and so we modeled price uncertainty by giving a small number of fixed value samples from actual shipping rates that we did in our crawl, which I'll describe later, and always including 0, because 0 represents free shipping. And this is how we modeled price uncertainty. And then there's exchange rate uncertainty. So anyone can go and take a look at any given second what the exchange rate is, and that's pretty clear and straightforward. But the question is, I don't know the exact second that the exchange rate was computed. Maybe, you know, and within a few seconds or minutes even, this can be very volatile. So, and the third level of uncertainty is payment time uncertainty. You know that Alice is going to send the payment to the blockchain within these 15 minutes, but or you don't know exactly when it is. Maybe it's 15 minutes. Maybe you have some better idea. So depending on the information that the tracker can see, there's lots of different places for uncertainty. Some trackers will have more, some will have less, but I'll omit the details for that for now. Anyway, in our paper, so we tried to estimate this linkability, and we used BlockSci to simulate 10,000 payment flows. And we modeled uncertainty in this way, and in this example, this is our default parameters where the price uncertainty set is 5, meaning you know that it's one of 5 prices based on, say, the shipping prices that the vendor offers. You know that the exchange rate window, you're assuming that it's a 5-minute window, and you're assuming that the customer will pay in 15-minute payment window. And we found, under these conditions, about 62% of the time, the anonymity set is 1. What does that mean? It means if the tracker were to look on the blockchain with all these parameters for all the transactions that meet these criteria, there's exactly 1 transaction, and it will be unique, which means that the tracker, even with partial information, the tracker doesn't have the Bitcoin address, the tracker doesn't have Alice's, the exact Bitcoin payment price even, but the tracker can identify the transaction with its limited information. With that, we'll build on this to our cluster intersection attack. And again, Alice really, really wants this cookie, but she's smart. She doesn't want to be identified, so first she mixes a coin with CoinJoin. And now she gets a beautiful, freshly mixed coin, and she goes ahead and sends that to Shop. And Shop sends back the cookie, and now Shop can't identify the cluster because the coin is mixed. It knows that there's an anonymity set associated with it. Here, we'll assume there's only 1 round of mixing, so it knows Alice is one of these clusters, but it doesn't know which. Okay. And now Alice wants to go ahead and buy some milk, so she goes to a different shop, the milk store, and does the same thing. She mixes coins with a different set of participants, and great. She has a freshly mixed coin, sends it to Shop, Shop sends back some milk, and Shop 2 doesn't either know Alice's cluster. Now, what Shop 2 does know, that again, there's an anonymity set associated with it. It's one of these 4 clusters, but it can't identify Alice. And again, if in practice you do many rounds of mixing, it won't really be an anonymity set of size 4. It'll be much, much larger. Great. But what about a tracker present on both Shop 1 and Shop 2's site? And so Shop 1's view is these 4 clusters, Shop 2's view is these 4 clusters, and notice that there's one thing in common. The intersection is exactly that cluster. So Shop 2, sitting on both of these sites and knowing, well, Alice made a purchase here and a purchase there, can do the intersection attack and say, great, this is exactly Alice's cluster. And intersection attacks have been presented in the communications literature, but we show that this is very, very practical in cryptocurrencies as well. And we did a large-scale measurement where we first identified real CoinJoin attacks on the blockchain, and then we simulated a victim who mixes for up to 5 rounds, and we picked a timestamp, found a real CoinJoin attack on the blockchain, and simulated a victim mixing their coins in that way. And then we posited an adversary who knows that two of these coins were actually belonging to the same person. And we said, well, what can that adversary learn? Can it re-identify the cluster? And again, I'm just going to give a small sample of our results, but we found that the cluster intersection attack is very effective. As would be expected, with the number of rounds of mixing, it degrades. And as also be expected, with the more observations you have, it improves. So the intersection of two different payment addresses would be smaller, but the intersection, if the tracker knows that, say, Alice has 3, 4, or 5 purchases, the intersection is likely, smaller and has a much larger chance of being unique. Finally, we did a web measurement, and we said, well, what can trackers actually see on Bitcoin pages? And we had some pretty astounding findings. The very top-level view of is that 40% of trackers leaked transaction-relevant data to third parties. 41% of top-level sites leaked transaction-relevant details to third parties that would help them identify transactions in the blockchain, and 35% leaked PII. And notice that the PII leak doesn't have to happen on the same website. If there's a third site in which Alice paid with just a credit card, but she used, but that site sent some PII to the third party can use that to tag it with Alice's address, assuming it has a cookie on each of these sites. And we used OpenWPM for our web measurements. Finally, we did an end-to-end measurement where we actually participated in we simulated a wallet that started off with, well, we took a real wallet where had real spending patterns that the coins were clustered by our clustering algorithm, and we went ahead and participated in coin joins to mix these coins, and we went to 20 different sites, and we made purchases at these sites, and we looked at what trackers were on each site, and in particular, we looked for overlap in trackers that could see 2 of them, and we found that there were 25 pairs of sites in which 2 trackers overlapped, and under conservative assumptions, in 80% of those sites, the trackers could our attack worked end-to-end. So first, that they can use their partial information to identify the payment transactions, and second, once they identify the payment transactions, they could successfully perform the cluster intersection attack, leading back to Alice's cluster. Mitigations, what are mitigations for these attacks? Well, there are merchant-level mitigations, which basically amounts to stop sharing so much data with trackers. Unfortunately, as we show in our paper, a lot of these sharings are intentional. And we derive that based on how they're shared. If they're shared in the body of, say, post addresses, they'd be, a post request, they'd be intentional, as opposed to in a referral request, they would be unintentional. We found that most are intentional, and this is expected because these tracking relationships are very profitable for merchants, such as retargeting. So the best defense for users is self-defense. That is, increased rounds of mixing. So we simulated up to 5, and we saw the attack degrade, but likely if you did more rounds of mixing, assuming that the number of observations are small, the attack would not be as successful. Tracking protection, such as Ghost3 or AdBlock Plus, that helps a bit. We reran the attacks with tracking protection on, and we found there were still leaks, but less. And of course, you can use different payment methods, such as anonymous cryptocurrencies, that will this attack should not apply to. Thank you very much for listening. In conclusion, I'd just like to say, payments and cryptocurrencies are a hard thing to get right. Cryptocurrency payments privacy sort of merges the bad parts of data anonymization, where you have a large trove of data that needs to be kept private, as well as payment problems that we've seen in communication networks, where you can analyze access patterns to learn potential linkages between different payments and addresses. And again, this work applies to both Bitcoin as well as any other standard blockchain-based cryptocurrency without privacy overlay. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Stephen, for leaving time for one question.
Cool talk. As far as I saw, you mainly looked at identifying people as a binary metric. So if the intersection was 1, then you found the right person, and if not, then not. Did you also look in how much is the anonymity set decreased if you could not identify one single person? Like, for example, if it could have been 2, like, do you have any intuition on how much you decreased the number of possible persons that could have spent a coin?
Yes, so in the paper we gave the full results, and we sort of posit an adversary that it's not really a binary adversary. The adversary we posit tries to identify a single, but then if it identifies 2, it just takes sort of a random guess. And so we found that slide that I showed, there was a 62% positive rate of getting a single transaction, but we found an adversary behaving like this that tries to be unique, but otherwise uses takes a guess of the other ones, has a 76% rate, so it does improve. And in particular, I'd also like to say our assumptions were very, very conservative. Oftentimes, an adversary a tracker is sort of embedded directly on the receipt page. So it knows right when that redirect happens, it knows exactly when the payment happens. So in practice, the trackers often have much more information, which will allow the identity to be higher as well.
Thanks.
Thank you, Steve.